An emergency room in Queens, New York, 1989. A young man is wheeled through the doors on a stretcher. His shirt is soaked through with blood. 3 bullet holes open in his chest. He's screaming, but not about the wounds. He's screaming about Robert De Niro. The nurses don't understand. They move fast. They cut open the shirt. They go looking for the entry wounds. And here is the thing that stops every single person in that room cold. There is no entry wound. There is no exit wound. What there is, attached to this young man's chest with wires running underneath his skin, are 3 small explosive packs loaded with fake blood. Squibs. Movie squibs. In a trauma bay. In Queens. He's not shot. He's an actor. And his name is Michael Imperioli. Here's what gets me about this story every time it comes back around. The injury that sent him to that emergency room had nothing to do with the fake bullets. It was real. A real glass, handed to him by a prop person who grabbed the wrong one, shattering in his hand when he hit the floor. Real blood, real pain, 2 fingers cut open. And yet the thing that almost gave the medical staff a collective heart attack was the thing that was entirely pretend. But to understand why this moment matters, why it's more than just a funny behind-the-scenes anecdote, you have to go back, all the way back, to a working-class neighborhood in Mount Vernon, New York, where a kid named Michael grew up watching his father pretend to be someone else. Here's the thing about Dominic Ralph Imperioli. During the week, he drove a bus. That was the job. That was how the bills got paid. But on weekends, on stolen evenings, in community productions that paid nothing and mattered everything, he was an amateur actor, not a famous one, not a successful one by any commercial measure, just a man who needed to do it, who felt something come alive in him when he stepped into another person's skin. His son was watching all of that. Michael Imperioli, born March 26, 1966, absorbed his father's hunger for performance, the way other kids absorb their father's love of baseball or boxing. It got into him early. It stayed. When the family moved from Mount Vernon to Brewster, New York, around the time Michael was 11, he took that hunger with him into a smaller town, a quieter life, and kept feeding it in secret. Think about that for a second. This is a kid in a working-class Italian-American family in New York in the 70s and early 80s. Acting is not a practical dream. It is barely a dream at all. It is the kind of thing people tell you to set aside in favor of something real, something that pays, something safe. His father never made it. His father drove a bus. And Michael looked at all of that and decided to try anyway. He would spend 6 years studying and auditioning and getting nowhere before his first real break arrived. 6 years. Most people quit in 2. He didn't. And that stubbornness, that refusal to accept no as a permanent answer, is the only reason this story exists at all. Now stay with me here, because before we get to the movie set, we need to talk about Spider, not the character, the man. In July of 1970, a 16-year-old kid named Michael Gianco was murdered. His nickname was Spider. He ran errands for a crew connected to the Lucchese crime family in New York, the kind of low-level work teenagers fall into around certain neighborhoods, certain social clubs, certain men who always seem to have money even though nobody can explain where it comes from. Spider was not a gangster. He was a kid doing favors for gangsters, which in that world is often a more dangerous position than being the gangster himself. The man who killed him was Tommy DeSimone, a Lucchese associate, a genuine psychopath by every account that survived him, a person who killed people over things that most human beings would not consider reasons. Tommy shot Spider twice. The accounts vary on what exactly triggered it. What's documented is that it was nothing, absolutely nothing worth a 16-year-old boy's life. Tommy DeSimone disappeared in 1979. The working assumption among law enforcement and mob historians is that the Gambino family, seeking retribution for DeSimone's unauthorized killing of their made man Billy Batts, had him killed before he could be formally inducted. You don't get a closed casket without somebody deciding you need one. Nearly 20 years later, Nicholas Pileggi wrote a book called Wise Guy, based on the testimony of Henry Hill, who had been inside that crew and witnessed all of it. Martin Scorsese read the book. And Michael Gianco, Spider, 16 years old and dead in 1970, got a second life on screen. The character would be played by a 23-year-old actor from Mount Vernon, New York, 6 years into his pursuit of something he refused to give up on. This is where it gets interesting. Michael Imperioli was cast in Goodfellas during the summer of 1989. The film was shooting in Astoria, Queens, about as far from Hollywood as a film set can feel. And for Imperioli, stepping onto that set was not a transaction. It was not a job. He would describe it years later as going from college to playing in the World Series on the same day. Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro, Ray Liotta, Martin Scorsese, and a 23-year-old kid from Brewster who had been told, in 100 subtle ways, that he didn't belong there. You have to understand what Scorsese's set was like. Most directors, particularly with a young actor in a small role, give you your blocking and your marks, and they move on. Scorsese gave Imperioli something that young actors rarely receive from anyone, let alone from one of the great directors alive. He made him feel like he was supposed to be there, not tolerated, supposed to be there. And in that atmosphere, something unlocked in Imperioli that probably never would have unlocked under a colder director. So much of what you see Spider do in Goodfellas is improvised. The way he moves through the card game.
I'll play these.
What? Play those?
I thought
The small gestures. The rhythm of a kid trying to be invisible around men who could end him. All of that came out of Imperioli in the room in the moment, trusted by a director who believed that the truth lives in the actor, not on the page. Here's what I keep coming back to about this. Imperioli was so deeply inside that set, so committed, that he did something that practically no young actor working a small role in a big production would ever dare to do. He walked up to the props manager and told him he wanted to rearrange the bottles on the poker table. Spider served drinks to the crew. If the bottles were facing a certain way, Spider's back was to the men when he poured. Imperioli's instinct said Spider should be facing them, should be reading them, should be working the room even when he wasn't asked to. That's not an acting note. That's character insight. That's a 23-year-old kid trusting himself enough to speak up on a Scorsese set, which by his own description took more nerve than almost anything else he did in that film. Scorsese listened. Scorsese agreed. The bottles moved. Now, the death scene. Spider appears twice in Goodfellas. The first time, Tommy DeVito, Joe Pesci's character, shoots him in the foot for sport during a card game, purely because he can, purely because he's the kind of man who requires an audience for his cruelty. The second time, Spider, limping and fed up, tells Tommy to go somewhere anatomically impossible. Tommy shoots him dead without a second of hesitation. For the death scene, the production was careful. The backward fall Spider makes after the shots is a stunt. There was a stunt double available. The choreography had been rehearsed. Everything was set up to execute the moment safely. Imperioli turned down the stunt double. Listen to this. He didn't do it out of recklessness. He did it because he was that kind of actor. The kind who needs to be in the moment, in the body, in the real physics of it. He said, no, I want to do my own stunt. He wanted to feel the fall. He wanted to hit the floor as Spider, not watch someone else do it from 30 feet away. Here's the part nobody mentions when they tell this story. Before the cameras rolled, the prop and effects team rigged Imperioli's chest with 3 squibs. These are small explosive devices, the standard tool for simulating gunshot wounds in film. Each squib is a tiny packet of charge that detonates on cue, rupturing a pocket of fake blood outward through the shirt in a burst that, on camera, looks exactly like a bullet exiting tissue. The charges are connected by thin wires running underneath the actor's clothing. Set off in sequence, in the right hands, it creates one of the most convincing illusions in practical effects work. So Imperioli stands there in his costume, 3 squibs on his chest, wires taped to his skin, a glass in his hand, ready to die for Martin Scorsese. The prop person handed him the glass. Not a breakaway glass, not the sugar glass that film sets use for exactly this situation, a brittle compound that looks real and shatters harmlessly. A real glass, an actual drinking glass. The kind you'd find in any bar in Queens on any given night. Nobody caught it. The cameras rolled. Pesci shot him. The squibs blew. The fake blood erupted through the shirt. And Imperioli went flying backward into the bar, hitting it hard, the way he'd rehearsed, the way Spider would fall, and the glass exploded in his hand. Real glass, real force, 2 fingers sliced open. He looked up from the floor, and Robert De Niro was looking down at him, not performing, just looking. A veteran who had seen things go wrong on sets before and knew immediately that something here was different. The cut was bad. A production assistant got him into a car and drove toward the nearest emergency room, which happened to be in Queens. And here is where this story becomes something else entirely. This 23-year-old actor pulls into an emergency room. It's Queens. It's 1989. His shirt is soaked in blood. There are 3 ruptures in the fabric of his chest. He's bleeding from his hand, but that is not what anyone sees first. What the nurses see is a young man with 3 bullet wounds. They don't ask questions. They don't wait. They get him onto a stretcher and they move. He's telling them the whole time, I'm making a movie. I just cut my hand. I'm doing a movie with Martin Scorsese. I work with Robert De Niro. I'm not shot. Think about that for a second. You're a nurse in a Queens emergency room in 1989, and a man covered in blood with what appear to be bullet holes in his chest is telling you, with complete urgency, that he works with Robert De Niro. What do? You do exactly what they did. You assume he's in shock. You assume the trauma is talking. You wheel him into trauma and you start cutting open the shirt to locate the wounds. And underneath the shirt, they find wires. They find small detonation packs. They find red pigment and glycerin, and a rig that makes no biological sense at all. He said later, I told you I'm doing a movie. I just cut my fingers. The hospital, apparently not finding this particularly funny, sent him back out to the waiting room, where he sat for 2 hours, before anyone stitched up his hand. 2 hours. Bleeding from a real wound, surrounded by the evidence of fake ones, in a waiting room in Queens, having just been shot by Joe Pesci. You cannot make this up. Here's what I keep coming back to with this story. The injury that mattered, the cut that sent him there, took 2 hours to treat. And the thing that created the entire emergency response, the scramble, the stretcher, the trauma bay, was entirely fictional. The real harm got less urgency than the pretend harm. There is something in that which cuts deeper than the story itself, if you sit with it long enough. They stitched his fingers. They sent him back to the set. And they filmed 3 more takes of the death scene. That detail, that's the one that lands. He goes to the emergency room. He spends 2 hours in a waiting room. He gets stitched up. And then he goes back, gets back in position, gets back into the body of Spider, and they do it 3 more times, because that's what the scene needed, because Scorsese needed the right take, and because Imperioli, after 6 years of nothing, was not going to let a cut hand and a comedy of errors in a Queens ER be the reason he gave anything less than everything. Here's the thing about what happened after Goodfellas. The movie came out in 1990 and changed everything. It changed cinema's relationship to mob storytelling. It changed what audiences believed they understood about that world. And it launched careers that defined the next 20 years of American television. Nearly a decade later, the casting directors for a new HBO pilot brought Michael Imperioli in to read for creator David Chase. The show was called The Sopranos. The character was Christopher Moltisanti, a young mob associate with talent he can't channel and rage he can't control, and a desperate need to be taken seriously by men who keep deciding he isn't ready. You cannot look at that casting and not ask yourself whether Scorsese's decision to trust Imperioli on that Queens set in 1989 was part of a chain that ran directly to that audition room a decade later. Whether the 6 years of study, the courage to rearrange the prop bottles, the refusal of the stunt double, the 3 more takes after the emergency room, all of it accumulated into a person that David Chase recognized as something specific, something real, something that couldn't be faked. Imperioli won the Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Drama Series. For that role in 2004, he played Christopher in The Sopranos for 8 years. And here's the callback that the real mob historians always appreciate. The Sopranos writers, with Imperioli involved as both actor and writer on the show, built in a small structural echo of Goodfellas. Christopher Moltisanti, in his life on The Sopranos, carries the same restless ambition, the same dangerous mouth, the same impulse to push where other men pull back that got Spider killed in a card game in 1968. The fictional Christopher is in many ways Spider's shadow, the version of that young man who lived past the scene, who got handed a real future instead of a prop one. The real Michael Gianco didn't get that. He was 16 in July of 1970, and then he wasn't anything at all. That's what I keep coming back to at the end of this story, the thing that makes it more than a funny anecdote about a prop mistake. Michael Imperioli got to go to the emergency room and come back. He got to film 3 more takes. He got The Sopranos and an Emmy, and decades of work that mattered. The real Spider didn't get to argue with anyone about fake bullet wounds. Tommy DeSimone didn't give him the option. Somewhere in that distance, between what's real and what's performed, between the glass that should have been sugar and wasn't, between the trauma bay in Queens and the set in Astoria, is the whole strange weight of what it means to tell these stories, to inhabit them, to bleed a little for them. That emergency room in Queens is something else now. The Goodfellas locations in Astoria have mostly been renovated, turned over, made into something unrecognizable to anyone who knew what was filmed there. But if you know the story, if you really know it, you can walk through that neighborhood and feel it. A 23-year-old kid on a stretcher, 3 fake bullet holes in his chest, trying to convince a nurse that Robert De Niro is standing 30 blocks away waiting for him to come back and die correctly. She didn't believe him. The story was too strange to be true, which is, of course, the thing that made it exactly true. If this story got to you, do me a favor and hit subscribe. Every week we go this deep on a story that deserves the full treatment, and I want to know what you think in the comments. Here's the question. Does Michael Imperioli's performance as Spider, knowing now that he was physically bleeding during that take, change the way you watch that scene? Does the real blood make it more real? Drop it below. Let's talk about it.